The shop on Argyle Avenue. Imagine a small pawn shop on a fading Chicago block where the trains rattle like old bones and the neon buzz never quite sleeps. Tonight, we meet Thomas Grady, 52, widower, ex-accountant, who bought the shop because it was cheaper than forgiving himself. A preacher who lost his calling, a son who won't answer the phone, and a veteran who pawns his medals for rent will pass through the door like shadows with keys. What happens when a good man realizes his goodness has become a mask? Stay with me. This is a story about debt and mercy, about the great American gamble that a second chance will arrive before the first one burns down the house. Part 1. The Balance Sheet of the Heart. On Argyle Avenue, the pavement buckled like a tired back and the streetlights cut cones of light, making islands of visibility in a sea of shadow. Thomas Grady stood behind the counter of his pawn shop, Grady's Goods and Loans, and tried to breathe without tasting the metallic dust that settled on everything. The open sign flickered as if undecided, a stuttering pulse. He had meant to fix it for 6 months. People brought their lives to him in fragments. A trumpet with a dent at the bell, a wedding ring with a scratched inscription, tools that still had drywall in their teeth. There was no object in the place that didn't have the grime of a story on it. A pawn shop is a confessional with fluorescent lighting, he liked to say, but never out loud, only to the silence that collected in the corners after closing. He was 52 and had once been an accountant at a mid-sized logistics firm. He kept the ledger like a catechism, debits here, credits there, righteousness in the middle column, until the audits turned dark and the numbers learned to lie. He left before he had to explain why the numbers wanted to lie, and before anyone could ask him who taught them. After Mary died, his wife, quick laughter, slow illness, he bought the shop because the price was low and the cost of penance felt due. Mary had loved second-hand stores. She said every shelf was a chorus of could have been. He could not enter a church anymore without feeling God lean over and whisper, "You are not finished with being guilty." So he came here. At 10 minutes before closing, a man ambled in, cradling a velvet box as if it contained a birthright. He wore a suit that was an apology for something he could not name, and shoes polished beyond their means. His hair was combed with a discipline that made Thomas feel undisciplined by comparison. "I'm not here to sell," the man said, placing the box on the glass, "only to know what it's worth." "That's everyone," Thomas said, and when the man's face stayed blank, he added, "the object and the knowing." The man opened the box. A gold pocket watch, flawless, with a face that looked like the moon when it has nothing to prove. "My grandfather," he said. "He kept trains on time when time still had dignity." Thomas took the watch, felt its weight. The tick was honest, a small animal heart. He could call a price, a comfort, a loan against circumstance. He had done it for 2 years now, and could tell within a heartbeat what a desperate man would accept. "It's worth less than what you're trying to keep," Thomas said gently. "Isn't that always the problem?" The man smiled, ruined and bright at once. "I'm Reverend Aaron Pierce. I used to have a church 3 blocks over." Thomas looked up. He knew the name. The church had folded last winter in a scandal that didn't make headlines because there were too many scandals and too few people left to read them. Something about money, or trust, or both. "We don't trade in absolutions," Thomas said because he thought it would scare the man away and because he wanted to say it to himself. "I'm not asking for absolution," Pierce said, "just a valuation." Thomas quoted a number that was fair, which is to say slightly higher than a cynical market would allow, because he could not bear to see the watch leave the man's hands on any arithmetic less than mercy. Pierce nodded, as if the figure matched a truth he already knew. "You can keep it," Pierce said. "I'll come back for it. A sermon is easiest when you can believe in the return of what you lost." "Pawn or sell?" "Pawn," Pierce answered, and smiled like a man forgiving a child for stealing bread. When he was gone, the shop smelled faintly of the winter coats of congregations. Thomas set the watch in the safe. He tried to imagine God indebted to the terms of the ticket stub, an almighty that must return for what it pawned. The thought felt like blasphemy and relief. At closing, he counted the bills with the old accountant's hands that remembered columns and controls, and drew lines beneath his day. A new laptop from a grandson who had meant to study design and now drove for a rideshare. A power drill that looked like a weapon but only hissed when squeezed. The watch. He wrote the numbers down, then stared at them until they stopped promising anything. The night poured through the door with the last customer, a young-looking 50 with a veteran's posture and a face sculpted by sleeplessness. He placed a medal on the glass, slow, as if weight might break the past. "I'm just here to see how much hope is worth," the man said without irony. "There's a price list," Thomas said, nodding toward the sign they never updated. "It's not on there," the man replied. "Bronze Star, name's Isaiah Merrick." Thomas had learned not to ask if he didn't want to know, but the medal shone with a clean, stubborn light, and the man's hands were steady as a prayer. "I can loan you 150 against it," Thomas said, ashamed of the poverty of the offer. "It's worth more," Isaiah said. "I know, but the problem with medals is they appreciate in silence and depreciate in rent." His smile was careful. "Keep it for a week. If I don't come back, sell it to whoever wants to pretend they did something brave." Thomas made the ticket, pushed it across. "What's breaking?" he asked, betraying himself. "Nothing, or everything. I can't sleep in that apartment anymore. The wall hums, the refrigerator talks, the past parks outside and leaves the engine running." Isaiah shrugged. "I thought maybe I'd check into a motel. A cheap one where nobody asks if you're okay because the answer's no." After he left, Thomas stood over the medal as if it might accuse him of a crime. He locked it in the safe beside the watch. 2 small suns in a darkness he controlled with a key. He turned the sign to closed and pulled the metal gate across the glass. The street hissed. Somewhere a train shouted its metal syllables. He could not claim that he had done harm today, nor could he prove that he had done good. He felt like a man who sells umbrellas in a flood. At home, the apartment upstairs from the shop had ceilings that remembered higher ambitions. The radiators ticked like insects. Mary's favorite mug, world's okayest gardener, held pens now. He had not touched her closet. It was not superstition. It was an accounting, the ledger where grief kept its assets. He lay on the couch because the bed made promises he could not keep. Sleep did not arrive. It negotiated at the doorway, asked for better terms, left offended. At 2 a.m., a knock. Not a polite knock. A demand. Thomas rose with a foreboding that felt like math. Inevitable, cold. On the stairs stood a young woman bundled in a hoodie and a reckless kind of purpose. She carried no object to pawn, only a hunger to escape something chasing her from inside. Her eyes were lovely in the way a distant thunderhead is beautiful, a shape that guarantees weather. "You're closed," she said, daring him to say otherwise. "You're right," Thomas answered and stepped aside. "Come in." Part 2. The Girl Who Knew the Price of Tomorrow. The girl's name was Lila, which she offered with the quickness of one trained to show ID at the door of every room. She did not sit. She paced with the nervous elegance of someone who had learned to make a small space into a field. "I'm not here to pawn anything," she said, glancing around the shop. "But maybe I need to pawn myself. Do you take futures? Do you loan against the promise that tomorrow I'll be a different person?" "I don't do that business," Thomas said. "It never pays." She laughed. "You'd be surprised." Her face was hard to date. Late 20s or early 30s. One of those ages where people carry more years than the mirror can count. She kept pushing her hands into the hoodie pocket as if expecting a verdict to be printed there. "I have a father," she began and stopped. "No, I have a man who was a father and forgot how." "Most fathers do," Thomas said. He heard the bitterness and apologized with a tilt of the head. "He's in Ohio," she continued. "I'm not calling him. I'm not calling anybody. But she looked up, suddenly furious. Everyone thinks they can choose their story. That's the lie of our time. We're all marketers of ourselves. Here's the brand of me. I'm fine. And inside, she tapped her chest. Inside is a warehouse where everything is stacked to the ceiling and the inventory list burned a long time ago. What brought you here? The sign, she said and smiled. Open. That lie is kinder than the truth. She finally sat, but perched at the edge as if the chair were a cliff. I was clean for 6 months. The words dropped without theatrics. 6 months, and then Tuesday came like a cousin with a bad idea. My sponsor says people aren't coins to be exchanged for the right to use again. But I don't need a coin. I need somewhere to put my body where it can't escape. And your shop looks like a place where things wait without complaint. Thomas felt the old accountant in him begin to count. Time, days, the arithmetic of relapse. You can wait here tonight, he said. I can make coffee that tastes like a rumor, and there's a couch that offends nobody. She shook her head. I have to stay moving. If I stop, the part of me that wants to be good shows up with a lecture, and the part that wants to disappear shows up with a map, and I'm a town hall meeting that never ends. Walk with me, Thomas heard himself say, and then marveled at who had spoken. They walked down Argyle, where small restaurants dreamed of better rent, and the laundromat never closed because sorrow has a lot of clothes. The night had that thin, spiritual cold that does not quite convince you it's winter. Lila matched his steps, an arm's length away, the distance of a stranger who could become family or danger, depending on the sentence you say next. Why the shop? She asked. My wife loved second chances, he said. She thought objects remembered the hands that held them and wanted continuity. The last thing she bought before the hospital was a cracked vase because the store owner told her it survived a fall and still held water. She said, So do we. After she died, I wanted to keep watch over broken things as if keeping watch over her. Did it help? No, he said. And also yes. They passed a mural. Faces of neighbors painted in colors so honest they did not flatter. A man slept beneath it, knees to chest. Lila stopped. My father would say that man made choices, she murmured. He always says that, like he's reading the verdict to a tired jury. But I know this man is an avalanche of choices from people he will never meet. The people who sell the rope rarely ask who plans to hang, Thomas said softly, hearing how ugly it was and letting it stand because ugliness likes daylight too. At the corner, a police cruiser idled. The officer inside looked at them as if judging a margin of error. Lila flinched. Have you done something? Thomas asked. Every day, she said. But not tonight. They circled back. In the shop, she stood at the counter and ran her fingers over the glass as if reading Braille. What's the rarest thing you have? Hope, he answered, surprising himself with the speed. She smiled, and the smile was whole, a brief rooftop in the rain. You know, Mr. Grady, you talk like a pastor who abandoned the pulpit for a calculator. I abandoned the calculator too, he replied. Her eyes landed on the safe behind the counter. She didn't ask for what was inside, and he didn't tell her. But the safe hummed in his mind like a secret that knows its own name. The watch, the medal, 2 pledges from 2 men trying not to fall into the same hole. He felt like a bank that served a god who charged interest. Can I sleep here after all? She asked suddenly. I think the part of me with the map left to buy a sandwich. He nodded. The couch offends nobody. He made coffee that tasted like reliability and found a blanket that remembered Mary's knees. Lila curled on the couch with the suspicion of a stray animal and was asleep before he turned away. Thomas sat in the chair by the window, guardian of a shop and a girl and his own ridiculous conscience. He had the sense that he was at the top of a hill that had been climbing him for years, and that tomorrow the descent would begin whether he liked it or not. At dawn, the train shouted again, metals considering themselves. Leela woke, eyes immediately alert. I dreamed I was a house full of doors, she said. Every door led to another door. Then one opened onto a field, and the field said my name. That's never happened. Some fields mean it, Thomas said. Do you ever feel watched? She asked. Not by God, but by the ledger of yourself. All the time. She stood. I'll come back tonight. If I make it until evening without using, I'll bring you something that isn't ashamed to be itself. What would that be? My voice, she said, and was already at the door. He watched her leave, then opened the shop. At 10, Reverend Pierce returned, not for the watch, but to sit on the stool and confess to a stranger. At noon, Isaiah came by with a paper bag and the expensive calm of someone who had found a motel room with a door that locked from the inside. The shop became a waiting room for decisions that had kept themselves delayed. Thomas began to suspect that he was running a church without walls and a court without judges, and that both institutions were underfunded by design. Part 3. The Arithmetic of Mercy. That afternoon, a man in a Navy windbreaker entered with the authority of someone accustomed to rooms yielding to his purpose. He had a badge clipped to his belt that flashed when he moved, and a smile that insisted on being believed. "Mr. Grady, Detective Paul Santoro," he said, offering a hand. "Just a few questions about some items that may have come through here." "What kind of items?" "The universal kind," Santoro answered, glancing around. "Laptops, jewelry, timepieces. There's been a spate of burglaries from condos near the lake. The thief is opinionated in his tastes." Thomas gestured to the binders with intake forms, immaculate rows of numbers and names. Old habits survived. Santoro flipped through, nodding like a man reading the weather. "You keep good records," he said. "Accountant?" "Retired," Thomas replied. "Retired like a boxer retires," Santoro said. "Or like a saint retires." "Like a bookkeeper quits a job in which truth wore a rubber mask," Thomas answered, surprising himself with the heat in his voice. Santoro smiled, unoffended. "I came because a witness saw a young woman visiting your shop late. Hoodie, small, quick, the kind of quick that suggests either cheerleading or running from bad decisions." Thomas felt his throat tighten. "She didn't bring merchandise," he said. "Sometimes the merchandise is information." The detective's tone softened. "Mr. Grady, I don't arrest people for being the kind of desperate that keeps a person alive. But there's a watch, gold pocket watch, an heirloom, taken from an old man who cried when he filed the report. I'm not accusing, I'm inviting cooperation." Thomas felt the safe in the room like a second heart. Reverend Pierce's watch sat there, legitimately pawned, yet the form of coincidence wrapped itself around his shoulders. "I have a pawned pocket watch," he said carefully. "It belongs to a Reverend Pierce. I saw an ID. Santoro wrote a note. Pierce," he repeated as if trying on the name. "The scandalized preacher. The city grows men like him the way old houses grow mold. Still, a watch is innocent of its owner's sins." Thomas said nothing. Santoro closed the binder. "If the girl returns, give her my card. Tell her I can help her stay out of a kind of trouble that eats your future rather than spits it out." He slipped the card across the glass. "And if someone brings in a bronze star, call me. The thieves love the romance of such things." Thomas's hand hovered over the card without touching it, like a blessing that cannot decide whether to descend. "What does mercy look like in your line of work, detective?" "Like paperwork," Santoro said, "and sometimes like not reading the last page of a file." After he left, the shop felt heavier. Thomas opened the safe, took out the watch and the medal, and set them on a velvet cloth as if performing a mass he no longer believed in. 2 sons again, accusing and absolving. He wanted to protect them from being evidence of anything. Pierce arrived near 3, coat collar high against a wind that had no patience for hairlines. He seemed less solemn than yesterday, as if he had confessed something to the air and been forgiven by an invisible committee. "I came to tell you a story," Pierce said, sitting. "When I was a young pastor, I believed in the simple math of repentance. Name your sin. Return the goat you stole, apologize to its owner, and voila, God restores dignity with a stamp and an official seal. Then a man came to my office with eyes the color of the bottom of the lake. He said he had cheated on his wife for years and wanted to stop. "Will you forgive me?" he asked. "I'm not the one you wounded," I said. He said, "I know, but I can't tell her. The telling would be its own cruelty." I told him that truth without love is a weapon, and love without truth is a counterfeit bill. He said, "What would you do?" I told him I would learn to carry the weight of my own hurt like a cross. He said, "I'm not Jesus." And I realized that what I had given him was not shepherding, but a riddle. Thomas listened, uncertain whether he was the pastor or the adulterer in the parable. "And what happened?" "He left," Pierce said. "He left the faith, I think. Or maybe the faith left him. I have been thinking ever since that perhaps God did not give us a math problem to solve, but an illness to share. Sin as a fever that breaks only when you sit with someone until the sweat chills. Isaiah came as evening fell, face calmer, carrying a bag of takeout. "Food for the house of second chances," he announced, setting cartons on the counter. He nodded to Pierce, who nodded back with the universal male greeting of, "I see your damage and honor it with silence." They ate without ceremony, practicing the liturgy of men who pretend not to be moved by kindness. "What did you do, Isaiah?" Pierce asked finally. "I did," Isaiah said. "I did the thing for which there is a medal, and the thing for which there is a nightmare. The problem is, they arrive together in the same envelope. Some nights I open the wrong one." "You pawned the medal to sleep in a motel," Thomas said. "Correct," Isaiah replied, and lifted his carton like a toast to the absurdity of lives. Pierce looked at Thomas. "You are a custodian of sacred trash," he said, "a priest with a price list." "Don't make me holy," Thomas muttered. "I have enough trouble being honest." At 7, Lila returned, eyes bright with the shaky triumph of surviving a day. She saw the men and stopped as if encountering a committee she had not applied to join. Isaiah shifted to make space. Pierce smiled a welcome that felt earned. "I promised you my voice," Lila told Thomas. "I didn't use. I walked. I cleaned a church basement for cash. I threw out the bottle caps under my couch like trophies from a war I don't intend to rejoin." "Sit," Thomas said, and she did. She ate like someone who had decided food wasn't an enemy. They talked without saying the things that would collapse them. And yet the room filled with a warmth that had nothing to do with the radiator. For a moment, Thomas believed in the possibility of a shop that was more than the sum of the things it kept from being lost. Which is exactly when the door opened and Trouble walked in wearing a North Face jacket and a smile that had paid rent in too many neighborhoods. He was young and thin in the way of people who run toward and away from something simultaneously. He carried a backpack with the confidence of a magician who knows an audience loves to be deceived. He glanced at Lila and froze. Lila's face changed in the way a field changes when the wind reroutes. Same grass, new weather. "Oh," the young man said softly. "You." Lila stood, color draining. "No," she said, but to whom it wasn't clear. Thomas stepped forward, old man brave. "We're closed," he said. "Then open for me," the young man replied and set the backpack on the counter with a soft thud that sounded like a secret falling. Part 4. The Weight of the Backpack. Silence rearranged itself into fewer pieces. The young man unzipped the backpack and took out silver that was not silver, watches that were not heirlooms but wanted to be, and a laptop with a sticker, "I voted," as if democracy might exonerate theft. He placed them carefully on the glass, a surgeon laying out instruments. "I need cash," he said. "Tonight." "We don't do that here," Thomas said. "You're a pawn shop," the young man replied, confused. "That's the business model." "We don't take what is obviously stolen from homes whose owners will come looking for their past," Thomas said clearly, surprising himself with the firmness of his own law. The young man smiled sadly. "Everything in here is stolen, sir. The trumpet from a boy's first song, the ring from a 20-year vow, the tool from a craftsman's bread. He turned to Lila. "Tell him, Lil, we met because you needed quick money for a quick goodbye." "I'm not with you," she said. "Not anymore." He looked genuinely wounded. "I was the one who stayed when you shook apart." "You stayed to watch," she said, and bit her lip until the sentence stopped. Isaiah shifted, shoulders tense. Pierce folded his hands as if to pray for a good ending. Thomas felt the safe thrum again like a tempted conscience. "Let me make a guess," the young man said. "You want me to take this bag and go, and pretend we never met. But if I go, I'll knock on the next door, and the door after that. I'll become what I already am. If I sell to you, at least the items land in a place where you keep names." "You think keeping names is salvation?" Pierce asked. "It's something," the young man replied. "My name is Evan, by the way. I stole from people who never met me but always had nicer furniture. Before you give me a sermon, know this. I'm tired. I'm tired of feeling like the world is a casino where my chips are counterfeit. I could use a moment of fairness, even if it's expensive. Fairness is often a luxury of those who weren't suffocated before lunch," Isaiah said quietly. Evan regarded him, respectful. "You look like a man who has seen the inside of a day I wouldn't survive. I'm not here to contest your experience. I'm here because the rent wouldn't wait for the job that never called. I'm here because my mother calls me from Florida and says the hurricane took her porch, and what the news won't say is the storm also took her patience. I'm here because I keep checking my bank app like it's a horoscope." Lila whispered, "Evan, please." The plea was strangled by something like memory. Sonorities of argument rose in Thomas's mind. He wanted to be stern. He wanted to be helpful. He wanted to be left alone to count. Instead, he asked, "Who taught you to steal?" "People who taught me to buy," Evan answered, "but to be more practical. A man named Rook, who pays cash no questions and asks his questions with a crowbar later. I'd rather deal with you. You look like you still believe in receipts." "Detective Santoro came by," Thomas said, placing the card on the counter. "He's looking for exactly this bag." Evan closed his eyes briefly and laughed at the ceiling. "Of course he is. Santoro has the patience of a gardener and the optimism of a gambler. If I go to him, will he hold my hand while I explain how I became a headline no one reads?" "Sometimes mercy looks like paperwork," Thomas said, quoting, and Santoro's ghostly presence felt like a choice waiting to be made. Pierce stood. "Young man," he said, "you are mistaking judgment for inevitability. There is a door that is not the door you think." "Which door is that?" "The one marked, 'Tell the truth faster than it can ruin you,'" the pastor replied. Evan considered this and shook his head. "You're the scandal pastor," he said, recognition dawning. "I saw your face in an article that made cruelty into entertainment. You lost the right to offer doors." "I did," Pierce said, "and yet here I am, still pointing." Thomas realized that he could not let this night be a rehearsal for all the other nights he had failed. "Here is my offer," he said to Evan. "Leave the bag. I will call Santoro. I will tell him you turned yourself in because you do not want to be measured only by your worst hour. I will give you enough cash to sleep in a room with a lock and to eat something that makes you feel like a citizen. If you run, I will deliver the bag and your name." Isaiah's eyebrows climbed. Lila stared. Evan laughed. "That's a terrible deal," he said, "which is why it might be the right one." "I don't negotiate on this," Thomas said. "I negotiate on everything else." Evan met his gaze for a long time, the room holding its breath. "What about her?" he asked, nodding to Lila. "What does she owe you for your compassion? Because compassion always sends a bill, and then we hate the debt. She owes me only the chance to practice being someone who believes in her," Thomas said, speaking slowly so that he would not outrun his courage. Evan opened his hands, a gesture empty of tricks. "Okay," he said. "Okay, call the gardener gambler. I'm tired of rehearsing what the judge will say." Thomas dialed. Santoro arrived like a storm that chooses grace over wind. He greeted Evan by first name, which told Thomas a complete story. He listened. He asked questions that were neither traps nor invitations to lie. He did not handcuff Evan in the shop. He gave him a paper with a morning time and a room number, and an assurance that surrender, properly timed, can be theater with a merciful ending. When they left, Thomas needed to sit but couldn't. His body was a bell rung by an invisible beetle. Lila began to cry, quietly, like a faucet left on in the other room. "I dated him," she said finally, like a confession no one asked for. "On and off for a year and forever. He liked to stand on roofs and talk about the city as if it were a machine we could fix. He never believed in tomorrow. He believed in just the right now in which a door might open if you kick it." "Does he hurt you?" Isaiah asked. "He hurts the part of me that wants to commit to living," she said. "But he also carried me when the detox tremors came. I owe him a debt measured in the shaking hands he held." Pierce poured water for everyone as if water could reassign guilt. "And you, Thomas? What has this done to you?" Thomas looked at the safe, now empty of only its certainty. "I don't know," he said. "I only know that I left accounting because numbers were being used to wash dirt that would never be clean. I bought this shop to stand near the dirt without pretending it was clean. But tonight I fear I have dressed in a white shirt and stepped into the mud and will pretend the shirt is still white." Isaiah put a hand on the counter, a veteran's calm. "Sir," he said, "that's not mud. That's ground. We stand on it, or we float away." The night deepened its argument. They stayed until the heater sighed as if it had its own conscience. Lila slept again, brief and hard, her face younger by a decade. Pierce wrote nothing and yet took notes on the air. Thomas watched the door like a man who believes both salvation and catastrophe use the same handle. Part 5. The ledger closed with a human hand. Morning cracked open and spilled light across the counter like a verdict. Santoro called. Evan showed up to the room with the number. He told the truth faster than it could ruin him, or at least as fast. There was a diversion program if the restitution could be arranged, a way to be supervised by hope rather than handcuffs. The houses would get some of their past back, not all. That is not how returns work. Pierce reclaimed his watch at noon, paying the interest in cash and gratitude. "You charge too little," he said, "but perhaps you were loaning me something that cannot be tallied." "I was buying time," Thomas said. "For whom?" "For everyone." Isaiah returned in the afternoon to reclaim his medal. He placed it on his palm and regarded it as if it might flinch. "I slept," he said. "The motel had a mural of a sunset over a lake, and that was corny enough to defeat the darkness. I dreamed I asked the medal for permission to be a person again, and it said yes, reluctantly." He pressed money into Thomas's hand, more than the loan, an insistence that dignity wanted a ledger too. Lila arrived at dusk, hands stuffed in her hoodie, eyes steady. "I made it 2 days," she announced. "I applied at the diner. The manager wants a person who shows up even when it's snowing. I said I am a blizzard that learned to carry plates." "Proud of you," Thomas said, and meant it. She looked at him, then at the shop. "You can't keep this open forever, you know. The city eats men like you and sends their bones to be used as chalk at children's hopscotch. Close early sometimes. Go to the lake. Watch the water pretend it's infinite." He nodded, the advice sinking like a necessary weight. "What do you owe me?" he teased, to deflate a moment that threatened to become a ceremony. "I owe you the attempt to be the kind of person a pawn ticket would be proud to name," she replied and laughed at herself for saying it. Near closing, the door opened once more, and a tall man entered, wearing the expression of someone whose job is to explain problems to people who already know about them. He was in his 60s with a beautiful head of hair that had decided gray was wisdom, and a suit that was not apologizing for anything. He looked around with a familiarity that suggested an old map. "Tommy," he said as if finishing a sentence. "It's been a long time." Thomas felt the years tilt. "Hello, Martin," he said. "We don't use Tommy here." "Right," Martin said, smiling, glancing at the price tags as if they were old friends. I heard you'd become the proprietor of Lives on Layaway. Martin had been Thomas's boss at the logistics firm, a man who believed that integrity was an opportunity cost. He had taught Thomas how numbers could be arranged into a polite lie. When the audits heated up, Martin's coat had been fireproof. Thomas's was not. "What do you need, Martin?" Thomas asked, anger and nostalgia engaging in a slow handshake. "I need absolution," Martin said lightly. "But I will settle for advice. The firm is under new scrutiny. Someone mentioned your name. I thought perhaps we could share an old confidence, that you left because you were grieving your wife, not because you objected to the coloring of a spreadsheet." "There was no coloring," Thomas said. "There was painting. There were murals. There were frescoes of deceit." Martin chuckled. "You always had a conscience like an algebra teacher. But listen, a few words to a reporter, a dilution of blame, and everyone goes home with their dignity in a plastic bag." Thomas felt something heat and then cool inside him. He looked at the safe, at the watch and the medal returned to their owners, at the counter where Evan's bag had sat like a diagnosis. He looked at Lila, who was restocking shelves with a care that suggested ownership of her own hands. "No," Thomas said, "I will not participate in a memorial service for the truth in which the grief is feigned." Martin sighed, as if disappointed by a favorite student. "You're still dramatic, but think of yourself. You have a shop that could use protection, friends who might need a favor. I always admired how you balanced arithmetic with empathy. This is empathy, for me. I owe you something," Thomas said. "I owe you the clarity I denied you years ago. You taught me a method for killing my own soul with a calculator. I'm not paying you interest on that lesson. I'm defaulting." Martin's eyes cooled. "Very well," he said. "I'll tell the reporter you turned sanctimonious. They love that. You'll be a character in a story where the good man is a nuisance." "Everyone is a nuisance in the wrong story," Thomas said softly. Martin left without buying anything. The bell chime sounded like an amends said through clenched teeth. "That was brave," Lila said. "That was necessary," Thomas replied. He felt lighter and also as if the wind had removed a wall from his house. Night came the way it always comes, like a clerk counting out change. The shop fell quiet. Thomas turned the sign to closed and did not pull the gate right away. He stood in the doorway and watched the street do its nightly inventory. The couple arguing about a bill, the kid on a scooter ready to be a legend, the woman with 3 bags of groceries that cost the price of a smaller dream. "Do you believe in God?" Lila asked beside him, voice casual, like asking about the weather. "I believe God believes in me at least enough to send me Brinks truck moments and see if I steal," he said. "I believe in mercy that dresses like paperwork and kindness that carries a flashlight. And forgiveness." He thought of the watch and the medal, of Evan in a room telling the truth, of Santoro with his gardener patients, of Pierce pointing toward a door he had forfeited the right to recommend, of Isaiah sleeping under a painted sunset, of Martin, still loyal to a gospel of unit cost and plausible deniability, of Mary, whose cracked vase had held water without complaint, of Lila, a field that had said her name at last. "Forgiveness," he said slowly, "is the balance sheet closed with a human hand. Numbers cannot do it. Stories can." Lila nodded. "Then tell me a story." So he began. Not the story of the shop, but of a boy who learned that if he asked his mother whether he was good, she would answer, "You are mine." He told of a man who lost a woman and went searching for her in objects, only to find that people are poor repositories for other people's eternity. He told of a city that believes in second chances because it has already used its first one up. He told of how a man can stand behind a counter and become more dangerous than a thief if he learns to price what should not be priced. Hope. When he finished, Lila was crying again. But it was a clean crying, like rain after a heat wave. "I'll come tomorrow," she said. "I'll be the kind of person who shows up in snow." He locked the door. The night was honest. The wind counted only what it could carry. He climbed the stairs to the apartment where Mary's mug still held pens. He took the pens out and washed the mug and made tea and drank it like an unbeliever practicing faith. He slept in the bed and did not negotiate with it. Dreams came, and they did not ask for identification. In the morning, he fixed the open sign. It glowed without stutter. He laughed, alone and not alone. The door would open and close, mercy would count and be counted, and on the ledger of Argyle Avenue he would write, in a handwriting that was his and not his. Assets, the people I did not let go. Liabilities, the stories I was too tired to hear. Equity, whatever remains when love pays what love owes. The train shouted. The city blinked. The first customer entered holding a trumpet with a dent at the bell and a face that said he was trying. Thomas Grady welcomed him into the confessional with fluorescent lighting, ready to buy and ready to forgive, which in this neighborhood were sometimes the same business. If this story sat with you like a familiar ache, and maybe a small relief, tap that like button so it reaches someone who needs it tonight. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Tell me in the comments which moment felt most true to you, or who you saw yourself in. Thomas, Lila, Isaiah, Reverend Pierce, or even Evan. And if you want more modern American tales with a classic soul-searching vibe, subscribe and ring the bell. New stories every week. Thanks for watching and for keeping the light on in places that are mostly shadow.